It's Sunday, December 17, 2023. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we really take the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Joining us today is a professor in the Department of Communication and Journalism at Texas A&M University, author of the award-winning Demagogue for President, the rhetorical genius of Donald Trump. Jennifer Mercieca, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
It's good to be back. Thank you for having me on.
We need to talk about some really important and serious things for the United States of America, and people like you who have written about the rise of fascism in the West have, I think in the past, people haven't really kind of taken it seriously. And now that Donald Trump is actually saying words like, I will be a dictator, albeit on day one, but, as far as I'm concerned, he's already a dictator and has very much proved that. It's time to really kind of turn up the heat on this. And I think the media is slowly beginning to realize that there's more at stake than just a traditional kind of two-horse race for a presidency. The line that really stuck with me recently is that America is sleepwalking into dictatorship. How do you feel about that, and how accurate do you think that is?
I do think that it's accurate. It feels as though events are spiraling out of control, that no one wants this matchup between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in 2024. But everyone seems to be throwing up their hands and saying that there's nothing they can do to stop it, that it's already sort of fait accompli. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we will have fascism. So I've been thinking about what meteorologists do when they talk about the difference between a tornado watch and a tornado warning. And you may probably have seen the memes where, they'll have sort of all the ingredients for tacos and it'll say taco watch. Yeah. And then they'll have the taco already made and it'll say taco warning. We are in fascism watch. We have all of the ingredients for fascism. The context is absolutely ripe for it. And we can talk about why that is. We have someone who is determined to mount a fascist takeover of America with Donald Trump. But it doesn't mean that we're on fascism watch, right? We don't have the taco yet, but we have all the ingredients ready to go.
We must make it clear that Donald Trump can't do this on his own, right? He's not smart enough, but B, there are an enormous number of people in the kind of Christo-fascist movement that are very keen to kind of make this happen. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal on Friday, I think. The headline was "The Conservative Coterie Behind Trump's Second-Term Agenda," and it talked about a small group of loyalists influencing his campaign policy plans, as many past top aides have broken with the former president. When he's making speeches now, I mean, some of the language is lifted directly from Hitler speeches, talking about vermin and poisoning the blood of the country. Trump's not writing that stuff, but other people are, and they're putting it on the prompt, and he is sanctioning it by saying it. So, I mean, the warning is very clear, isn't it? Even in code.
The warning is very clear. It's hard for people to believe it, though. So even though he has been very clear that he will stack the government with loyalists, he will purge anyone who is disloyal. He has lists of people. He's promised retribution. He's using, of course, the language of fascism. So using war strategies like treating people as objects, calling them vermin, threatening people. All of those things are classic signs of a fascist takeover. But it's so difficult to believe that that's actually what's happening. And, I felt this way in 2016 as I was watching Donald Trump campaign about whether or not he was a demagogue, right? If he was going to be an unaccountable leader, if he ever became president. And I kept sort of going back and forth, is he really a demagogue or is he pretending to be a demagogue for rhetorical effect? And what I decided at that point was that it doesn't matter. actually, if he is a real legitimate demagogue or just pretending to be one, because the effect is the same either way. For audiences, they're electing someone who's promising to be a demagogue or to be a fascist in this case. And the effect on politics is the same, whether or not. And then after January 6th, I don't think that could be an open question anymore, right? Donald Trump is an unaccountable leader. He refused to accept the election results. The will of the people was expressed through a fair and free election. He refused to accept those results, and he mounted a coup against the United States in the peaceful transition of power in order to remain in power. This is not someone who would become a dictator only for a day and then willingly give that up, right? He has proven more than anyone else in American history that he, in fact, wants that kind of power and refuses to give up power. And so I think we delude ourselves if we don't take it seriously.
It was Sean Hannity that asked him, "Are you going to be a dictator?"
Yeah.
Which is a ridiculous question, lacking all intelligence. But it was kind of suited the moment because it was Hannity asking the questions and Donald Trump answering them. So there weren't many gray cells between them. But the point was that, Trump gets off on all of this, doesn't he? I can really feel that even being asked, "Are you going to be a dictator?" excited him because he does look up to the dictators, not just in history, but currently around the world, and cites them often. And, and then he responded a couple of days later where he said, "Oh, the media is asking me to say, that Xi Jinping is stupid, but, he controls 1.4 billion people. So how can I say that's stupid?" But of course, no one was asking to ask Donald Trump if he thought Xi Jinping was stupid. And no one would ever think Xi Jinping is stupid. But this is Donald Trump's thinking, that people are either very smart, high intelligence, or they're dumb. What did you think about how he reacted to those questions about dictatorship?
Yeah, it was an interesting moment because Hannity was absolutely asking the question to prompt him to deny it.
Yeah,
right? He was framing it as if there was, this absurd accusation in the rigged media, right? That you would be a dictator. And Donald Trump absolutely embraced it. And then he embraced it so much that he wanted to underscore what was going on. And so he recounted for the audience what the narrative had been between he and Hannity. He said, "Oh, Hannity asked me this." And I say, "Yeah, absolutely. On day one only." Yeah. Right. And the audience, they laugh, they clap, they're enjoying it. They like the idea. And it's just a really fascinating moment for me because it reminds me so much of Adolf Hitler and what a loser he was and how much he hated the fact that media outside of Germany would write about what a loser he was. And so you probably know the story of Dorothy Thompson. She was one of the most important, most prominent foreign correspondents in Europe prior to Hitler's rise to power. And she wrote an article that was published in, I think, Cosmopolitan in the US. It was published in somewhere in the UK. And she ended up turning it into a book, and it was "I Saw Hitler." And in that, she described Hitler as someone who was a wannabe strongman, but unfortunately, for him, was weak-voiced, weak-minded, nervous, someone who couldn't carry on a conversation, someone who wanted, in fact, to be an artist, but had been rejected from the art schools, wanted to be then an architect, but was rejected from that too, ended up being a house painter, right? So she described this guy as a loser. And she said that he appealed to other losers, right? And so the reasons why Germans were embracing him in his party was because he lifted them up and told them that really the only thing that mattered was their race. And so if they had felt as though they were losers in life, they had this one thing going for them. And so, when Donald Trump said that he, embraced the idea of being a dictator, it just reminds me of the way that Hitler fashioned himself as a dictator, as a strong man. And in fact, the way that all of history, all fascists throughout history do this. They pretend that they are these tough guys, these fearless leaders. And really, they're just people who want us to believe that they're strong. And so for Donald Trump, yeah, he would love to embrace the label of being a dictator because he thinks that it makes him look strong. What he doesn't want us to think about is the fact that he's a loser. He lost the popular vote in 2016. He lost the popular vote and the electoral college vote in 2020. His party, with him as the party head, lost in 2018. They lost in 2020. They lost in 2022, right? And so Donald Trump is a loser. And he would much rather we think of him as a dictator than a loser.
His face, when in court, is the face of a loser, a very angry one,
Oh, yeah. The retribution is right there.
So,
He's
it's
like,
so
I'm
interesting,
going to
isn't
get
it?
them.
Because there's so many sides to this. And, the malignant narcissist is always putting on a show and pretending to be somebody that they're not. But ultimately, in those moments where he's photographed sitting in front of the judge, he gives us a version of Donald Trump that we don't normally see. Normally it's animated because he's in control. He's totally out of control in those moments. And he hates it, right?
Hates it. And he's being held accountable, which he also hates.
Something that he has evaded his entire life, because if you are the boss of the company and if you employ your family and sycophants and loyalists and people who will never say no to you, then, you are going to spend 30 or 40 or 50 years, in his case, never having to adhere to anybody else's rules. He certainly doesn't apply the taxation rules of the IRS or, anything that is, guardrails to live in a civilized society. He cares nothing for.
Absolutely. He's someone who has spent his life being unaccountable. He has never had to follow the rule of law. He has never had to follow the rules of ethics, certainly not political norms or norms of society. So he is someone who is uniquely, I think, uncontrollable. He has never permitted himself to be held accountable. And so, honestly, that's the last person we should ever put in charge of anything in any kind of leadership role.
Yeah, let alone the most powerful person on the planet, because there is also that. And I suppose this is why when he speaks freely, he will sometimes say, oh, my lawyers would tell me not to say this, but because he's still, even though he's employed those lawyers, he still can't handle diktat, and he has to fight against it.
Yeah. And that's a rhetorical strategy called paralipsis. I'm not saying, I'm just saying, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to get in trouble if I tell you this, but he loves to do that. Because he loves to appear to be violating the norms and the rules and to be a, politically incorrect, fearless speaker. He's none of those things. He's very calculated. But it also, like you say, it shows that he can't be held accountable. Even, when he has a speech written for him, he cannot be tied to the text, right? So one of the things that I wrote about in my statement for the January 6th committee is about how at his speech at the Ellipse on January 6th, he said the word fight 20 times. If you look at the speech text, it said the word fight one time, right? He cannot stick to he elaborates, right? He cannot be held accountable even to the text as it's written for him. He's unrestrained.
You got to fight like hell. If you don't fight, you're not going to have a country left.
That's right. All of that, all embellished.
And we'll go to the Capitol and I'll go with you. All of that stuff as well. Yeah. It's so interesting, isn't it, how these words are now so embedded in the nation's psyche. You would never normally memorize, portions of a political speech. And yet these words now have so many political and cultural ramifications that all of us can memorize things, like very fine people on both sides.
Right.
It's awful, and it draws comparisons to these dictators from history who made landmark speeches. You know, I think of Enoch Powell and Rivers of Blood. These are all, which is in Britain. These are moments in history, the goodies and the baddies as well, of course, because we remember the great civil rights speeches as well, and Barack Obama talking about hope and yes, we can. It's so interesting, isn't it, how the darkness is as powerful on our minds as the light moments.
Absolutely. So I am someone who memorizes speeches, right? I teach public speaking and study speeches. So for me, they've always been fascinating, you know, sort of works of art, but also they do so much political work within a culture. And so, yeah, like you say, you know, there are absolutely these fragments, you know, we might even think of them as memes today, but these fragments of speech text that presidents or other political figures throughout history have said, you know, that resonate across generations and across different contexts. So, you know, you have nothing to fear but fear itself, right? It's a day that will live in infamy. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, right? There are so many of these little memes, these little nuggets of text that, you know, leaders throughout history have said that have resonated. With Donald Trump, as you say, they do tend to be these moments of, you know, in a way, duplicity, right? You know, how does Donald Trump respond when there is a white supremacist parade and march in a state in America, largely due to him and his political campaign? He tries to explain it away by saying, well, you know, there were fine people on both sides, right? And so those kinds of moments where he is, you know, perhaps being held accountable, and he has to come up with some kind of response, and the way that he engineers a response that allows him to not be held accountable, you know, those are the things that we remember because it's tricky. One of the things that was written about Trump supporters that really resonated with me really early in his presidency was by Daniel Dale. And at the time he was, I think, at the Toronto Star, and he went and interviewed Donald Trump supporters somewhere in the middle of America, I believe, and asked them, you know, what they thought about some of the things that he said and whether they believed him. And the people that he quoted 201 said, "Nah, I didn't believe that when he said that. You know, that didn't seem right to me. But you know what? I love the fact that he is a good liar, right? Because he's lying for us, and they're all liars anyway. And we finally got a guy who is lying in the right way for the right people. You know, he's our liar, basically was what they said.
So screwed up, Jennifer, isn't it? It's just awful. What an awful way for a following to develop.
Absolutely. And of course, that reminded me of what Hannah Arendt wrote in The Origins of Totalitarianism. And I'm sure you've heard this repeated many times. It's another meme that's become very relevant in the last 8 years. And that is that the German people were both gullible and cynical, right? That they could at once believe that everything was possible and that nothing was true. And that really seems to me to be the defining characteristic of Trump supporters. You know, they're so cynical about any version of reality that doesn't correspond with the narrative that they get in their right-wing media ecosystem. And yet they're so willing to believe anything that they hear in their right-wing media ecosystem. They're so trusting and yet so distrusting, right? At the same time, so cynical. And that combination of gullibility and cynicism is so dangerous and so toxic.
Because often people get confused about how the German people were kind of co-opted into the Nazi party and how, you know, the German people were gullible to the policies of Adolf Hitler and those that, you know, came before him to, you know, push the country to the right in that way. And this is why we have to use history to help us, guide us during these moments. Did you ever think that America would be on the list of countries that could be radicalized to far-right extremism and dictatorship, totalitarianism? Because, I actually asked my smart speaker the other day the difference between Americans and Brits, and it said that Americans were more laid back and informal, which it's kind of true. But what goes with that is you therefore think, okay, well, maybe there are vulnerabilities in American culture, and that and being laid back and less formal, which actually is the reason why I kind of emigrated, because I wanted to, be amongst the informality. I enjoyed it. It's actually easier almost to co-opt people into a cult, political cult.
That's interesting. I haven't thought so much about the formality or informality of the nation and how that leads or makes us vulnerable to fascism. But that is something that I would like to think about more.
It's just a theory. I mean, there's no, it's just something I was thinking about.
So one thing that is something that I've thought more about is the way that authoritarianism in the United States has always existed, right? And so authoritarians, according to social psychology, in also political science, people with authoritarian personalities and authoritarian political systems or social systems, they really like hierarchy. Whether that's gender hierarchy, whether that's status hierarchy, racial hierarchy, doesn't matter. Maybe a combination of all of those things. They really like order. They're very angry and they get activated politically if there are violations of group norms around hierarchy, order, status, all those kinds of things. And they have a very strong, what's called a posse response, a very strong posse response, which means that they are likely to want to act out to defend group norms when those group norms and status hierarchies are challenged. Now, we have a lot of authoritarians in the United States. People raise their children to be authoritarians. So political scientists estimate that about 40% of the United States has authoritarian tendencies. Those tendencies can be activated. And so what we have seen, largely since 1965, but probably really intensely with, the rise of talk radio, Rush Limbaugh and Fox News and everything like that since the 80s and 90s. But what we have seen is constant messaging that would activate those authoritarian personalities. So constantly talking about hierarchy, violations of norms and status, how the people in charge are corrupt and they don't understand, or want to protect the right, good people, which, of course, are the audience members of Fox News and Rush Limbaugh. But instead, embrace the wrong people, want to protect the wrong people, those that have already violated, those hierarchies and those norms. And so, if you were to sort of watch Fox News or OAN or any of those other ones, Newsmax, and think about how those appeals work for authoritarians, what you would notice is that essentially every news article or every news package is framed with these authoritarian viewers in mind to activate, their fight or flight response, to hijack their amygdala, to get them outraged and to get them to act out as a posse, right? And the whole argument is that we're not violating democratic norms. We are defending democratic norms. They have already violated those norms. The norms no longer exist, right? And so it's very similar to what happened in Germany. And, in Germany, some German people had absolutely, gone Nazi, but others just realized that, this is the way things were now, right? And so while they hadn't actually gone Nazi themselves, they pretended to. because the disciplinary apparatus of the new German regime demanded that they act as though they had gone Nazi. And so that's where we're at in this country. We have a group of people who have gone Trump, who have gone fascist, who have their authoritarian impulses activated, who are wanting to lash out to defend what they think, are these group norms in hierarchy and status. And you have others who don't see another way, out of the situation. People who would typically vote Republican, don't really like Donald Trump, hoped that someone else would get nominated and, may still get nominated, hoped that the situation would resolve itself. The situation doesn't look like it's going to resolve itself. And so here they are having to, sort of pretend that they have gone Trump,
right,
have gone fascist and are willing to comply.
So the tribalism is kind of fundamental to the American way and American culture. And what you say about activating people's kind of authoritarian instincts is fascinating. I mean, that's the stuff of science fiction. I mean, that reminds me of the Fritz Lang movie, Metropolis, where, the people, the workers kind of become the robots almost. And so, here we are where if you take a MAGA Republican on their own and you explain to them factually about the fact that they're voting against their own interests, they could probably be talked around. But it's only when there are other people in the frame, family or, if it's at a rally, other supporters, that they find it so difficult to break out of that tribalism. And this is a problem, isn't it?
Well, it's how normalization works. So when Trump said that he was going to rid the country of the vermin, about a month ago, I think it was, I wrote, this piece where I said, now, would Trump's followers go along with that? Absolutely, they would. Right. And so you think, no, they would never vote for Hitler. Well, it's surprising. Maybe it shouldn't be surprising, that they absolutely would. And this is how they would rationalize it. They would say, he's not, he's just joking. And then they would say, well, maybe this country needs a Hitler. Maybe he would be our Hitler. And then they would vote for him, right? He's my Hitler now. And that's exactly, the Washington Post reported something this week where they, again, interviewed Trump supporters in Iowa. And there were people who said, well, my family call me a dictator when I say they have to clean the house. And so, this nation needs such dictator who's going to clean the house, and he's only going to do it for one day and, he'll be our dictator. They literally,
it's terrifying, isn't it? Because it is devaluing the history of dictatorships and it's making it, it's normalizing it, as you say, bringing it into the modern vernacular.
Yeah. And normalization is a fascinating process. Right. So persuasion scholars would tell you that we all walk around with our own unique latitude of acceptance and rejection for messaging, meaning that there are certain things that would fall within what we think is a good idea or normal within the realm of possible. And we would like those, and we would be very easy to persuade on those things. Things that fall outside of that would be our latitude of rejection, and we would tend to not even consider them. We might not even hear them, right? The messages would be so disconfirming of what we would believe that we wouldn't even listen to them. And so normalization is the process of shifting a culture or a group of people's latitude of acceptance towards a certain goal. Sometimes it's called moving the Overton window. And that's, a think tank wrote that. And think tanks are all about moving the Overton window or moving the latitude of acceptance and rejection around a policy issue. And so normalization is the process of saying something, repeating it, right? Hitler was very big on repetition as the best way to persuade a country. So it's very much a process of repeating a message or changing the value of a word. So dictator all of a sudden doesn't mean what you thought it meant 10 years ago. Now it means that guy you kind of like, Donald Trump, being president. And that process is where something that was once unthinkable, something that you would have immediately responded to, with a very strong negative response, starts to seem like common sense. And so what Donald Trump has done is he has normalized fascism in America over the last 8 years. Things that, in 2015, if he would have said them, I'm going to be a dictator just for a day, people would have run him out of the country, right? He certainly wouldn't be considered a viable option for the presidency. But today, people are like, oh, yeah, that's common sense. That's what we might need. Somebody like that, a strong leader who won't back down, who's on our side.
I want to talk more about this in just a moment, this idea of authoritarianism becoming fashionable for some Americans, where they feel like it is the solution to their problems. I also want to talk about how the media is responding to this. We have to take a quick pause for our sponsor. We'll come back and do more with Jennifer Mercieca next here on The Weekend Show. I've always found it difficult to find clothes that I like to wear. And when I find one thing that works, I just buy loads of them and just wear the same thing all the time. Well, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone stepped up to the challenge. Rhone's commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone helps you get ready for any occasion. The commuter collection offers the world's most comfortable pants, dress shirts, zips, and polos. You'll never have to worry about what to wear when you've got the Rhone commuter collection. The comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work or your 18 holes of golf. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With Rhone's wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with Gold Fusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. And on top of that, Rhone is 100% machine washable, so you can ditch the dry cleaner altogether. I personally love a technical fabric, something that is advanced and uses technology to make a more comfortable and more modern outfit. Now, the commuter collection can get you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. So head to rhone.com/Anthony and use promo code Anthony to save 20% off your entire order. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/Anthony and use code Anthony, ANTHONY. It's time to find your corner office comfort. Did you know that your temperature at night can have one of the greatest impacts on your sleep quality? If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bedsheets. Inspired by NASA, Miracle Made uses silver-infused fabrics and makes temperature-regulating bedding so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. Using silver-infused fabrics originally inspired by NASA, Miracle Made sheets are thermoregulating and designed to keep you at the perfect temperature all night long, so you get a better sleep every night. These sheets are infused with silver that prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, leaving them to stay cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other sheets. No more gross odors. Miracle sheets are luxuriously comfortable without the high price tag of other luxury brands, and feel as nice, if not nicer, than bed sheets used by some 5-star hotels. Stop sleeping on bacteria. Bacteria can clog your pores, causing outbreaks and acne. Sleep clean with Miracle. Go to trymiracle.com/weekend to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo code WEEKEND at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund.
Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/weekend and use the code WEEKEND to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. That's trymiracle.com/weekend to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode.
Welcome back to the Weekend Show. Jennifer, I'm fascinated with how the phrase dictator or even the concept of authoritarianism has been diluted by maybe the failure of the media to really kind of talk about it in serious terms. You know, we're very used to the US whitewashing history and you know, unfortunately, I mean, I heard Kevin McCarthy once saying, you know, we won the war for the Europeans. And I was thinking, well, that's not how we were taught it in England. But anyway, but this does go on, you know, and we've seen it, book banning and various things now that, again, are changing history and preventing people from being given full access to information for their future. So here we are where authoritarianism is obviously a subject that a lot of people are talking about now because Trump's admitted to being a dictator and admitted that he loves dictators, and his boyfriend, Kim Jong-un, who he sends little love letters to and gives him Elton John CDs and stuff. I mean, it's just so weird. Yeah. And yet it's also painfully dangerous. And so do you feel like the media really knows quite what their responsibility is right now? And what their job is in because this isn't just media bias. It's not about, oh, well, if you hate Donald Trump, you must be a Democrat. This is much deeper than that. This is cultural for everybody. Saving America.
Yeah. Yeah. It's difficult for journalists because of their news values and news routines and all of the commitments that they have to objective journalism, which they believe protect democracy, right? All of those things work against trying to defend the nation from Donald Trump, right? Once he is the leader of the party, once he's the front runner for the 2024 primary election, once he's the nominee, it's the same thing that happened in 2016, right? Once all of those things happen, you have to give that person attention. And even though they give him negative attention, right? They are constantly reporting, that he said this thing or that thing that is a terrible thing to say. It doesn't change the fact that they have to give him attention because of the way that journalism works. A lot of experts, people like Jay Rosen, have advocated for people in journalism to adopt a democracy frame as they cover the election. Even I've been interviewed on that on a few occasions. And what that would mean would be talking about, like you say, the stakes of the reporting. So not just, Donald Trump is in court. How does that play out for, the horse race of who's ahead and who's behind in the election? But Donald Trump is in court. What does that mean for democracy in America? What does that mean for democratic stability? And so one thing that I think that moving forward is very clear and is something that journalists should focus on is the difference between what scholars of democratic erosion and authoritarianism explain as the difference between the rule of law, which is democratic, and the way that autocrats choose to rule by law. And those phrases sound almost the same. And so it's not super easy to distinguish, but it's also not super easy to distinguish it, as these events play out in real life. So, for example, democracy is absolutely premised on the idea of the rule of law, the supremacy of the rule of law. And that means that the rules are known. The rule of law is like the laws are known, that the laws are followed, that they apply equally to everyone at all times, right? That there isn't a certain group of people that are more often penalized by the law or who are never penalized by the law. But in fact, that the law itself is the rule and the ruler of the nation, not the people who are supposed to enforce it. Whereas for autocrats, what they do is they hide behind law and they use the law capriciously to reward their loyalists and to punish their enemies. So there is no rule of law where the law itself is the ruler, but instead the law is used as a cudgel. It's used as a weapon, right? And so the rule of law is a principle. It's a democratic principle that upholds democracy itself. It's essential. Rule by law is autocratic, and it's a strategy used to gain power and to keep power. And you can keep people loyal if you promise that they can get away with things and the law will let them slide. You can make people intimidated, right? You can threaten people by saying that there will be consequences for you if you speak out or you go to a protest or you vote against me, right? Because the law can be used against any person at any time. That is incredibly autocratic. And that's what we're talking about this election. We're talking about two very different systems of justice.
And of governance, because ironically, the Republican Party have always claimed to be the party of law and order.
That's right.
And actually, it ain't like that anymore. Really now, it's the Democrats are the ones that are advocating for the Republic and for maintaining the Justice Department and the FBI. And the Republican plan is to do away with these institutions. Right. And so it is confusing for people who are historical conservatives because they're having to choose a camp. And, I'm starting to think that it could be a landslide for Joe Biden if they get the messaging right.
That's right. But at the same time, for people who are not super engaged with political news, which is the majority of the nation, when they hear, for example, Joe Biden is under investigation, right? There's an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden for corruption. They might hear that as, the rule of law is being applied, right? That this is good because, he's suspicious and, they would cynically believe it.
And it devalues Trump's crimes as well.
That's right. And so it makes them seem as though they're equal, right? Everybody's under investigation here, right? But so that's actually an example of rule by law. The Republicans in the House have the power to impeach a president. And so they're using that power capriciously, as far as we can tell, right? Evidence has not materialized that supports any impeachment inquiry so far. And so they are using it capriciously for revenge. And they're using it as a political opportunity so that it makes Biden look just as bad as Trump. That is rule by law. It's autocratic. But it has the appearance of being rule of law. And so it's really confusing for people who aren't paying a lot of attention. They just hear Biden's, being investigated and they don't know what that means.
And
that's how it works.
When we heard Hunter Biden on the steps of the Capitol a few days ago, kind of basically coming out and saying, they're trying to destroy me and my family with no evidence. Well, here I am. And of course, he's, he desires an open hearing so that the public can actually see what it is that he says in real time, which is entirely fair enough. That was a real moment of reality, wasn't it? It was like, there was realism, because so much of what we're seeing out of Republicans in Congress is performative.
Yeah.
And actually that was a real moment. And there was nothing they could say about it. All the stuff that James Comer's been saying to try and frame this as being corrupt. They have no evidence on Joe Biden. They have barely any evidence on Hunter Biden, who of course never served in any administration. It's so sad that his life is being destroyed continuously.
Yeah. Do
you think we need more of those real moments? Because I would like to hear more from Joe Biden. I would like to hear more from the Joe Biden's cabinet. I want more clarity and transparency and then the truth, will rise to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. At this point, American politics is like scripted television.
Yeah.
It really feels, the political spectacle really feels as though it really is just for entertainment every day. There are these plots and characters, and people make, these media appearances, and
it's all
about, it's all about outrage bait, attracting attention. And, it feels so fake. And I think what you're saying is what a lot of people feel, which is, why should I even pay attention to that TV show?
Right.
It's not even, it's not that good. And it makes me feel bad. And where is the authentic people, who will tell us the real truth about what is happening?
I was thinking this, I was quite moved at the death of Matthew Perry recently. And I don't really watch those types of Friends shows and stuff. I think I might have seen the first season when it first came out. But I was thinking the reason it was so successful in the US was because it did make you feel good. Like, it was a show that was full of kindness. These were like model Americans just doing their best, trying to get on. And then we kind of heard that, in real life, these actors had camaraderie and they all looked out for Matthew Perry. And he wrote this very beautiful book where he was being truthful about addiction and the disease. And those kind of real moments in popular culture, they very rarely play out in politics.
Yeah.
And yet Hunter Biden's speech that was very well calculated, showing up quickly in a car and being on the other side of the Capitol building, on the Senate side. And so, they didn't really get a chance to kind of get at him, and then he was off. But it would be so nice to kind of be amongst an American politics that actually did real things for the people, for the right reasons. And as you say, recently we had George Santos screaming in the halls of Congress a few days before being booted out for financial crimes. Man, what a mess.
Yeah, it's very interesting to hear you say that, because it reminds me of the ancient Greek concept of parousia, which translates to fearless speech. And so today we might call somebody a truth teller. And the way that you would know that they were actually speaking the truth, that what they said was authentic, was that there was some risk to themselves,
right,
to their reputation, to their personal safety, right? And so if whatever you said despite the risk, people believed, at least in ancient Greeks, that meant that it was actually true. And it just seems as though we have people who pretend to be truth tellers, who take no risks, right? And then we have made the situation so fraught and so dire for anyone who does come forward and takes a risk, that it almost seems impossible. So Cassidy Hutchinson
not
is a
worth
person.
It.
Yeah, not worth it. Cassidy Hutchinson is someone, over the whole Trump drama from January 6th on, who has emerged as a truth teller.
Yeah.
It's very clear that she has risked her personal safety, her reputation, her future within the Republican Party, all of these things, to tell the nation what she believes is the truth about the Trump administration and how it worked, and specifically what happened on January 6th. And we believe that she is telling the truth because she tells us that she has felt obligated, despite her better judgment, despite all of these things, to live up to her values, right? So she sees herself as a conservative, and her conservative values would tell her that it's her job to defend the Constitution. And so someone like that, I think, even though she is definitely very coached, the way she looks, the way she talks, what she says, all of those things are very coached. At the same time, it does seem to be an authentic truth, right? There's an authenticity there.
Well, there's always a nervousness in her speech because of the stakes being so high.
Yeah.
And I was very moved by the title of her book, which was quite an unusual title, just the word enough.
Yeah.
And that really made me, believe that the facade had to fall, and the performative aspect of all Republican politics, where it's just about owning the libs and it's just about spewing false propaganda. It's exhausting for them. I mean, they are tired, not because they work hard, but because lying is exhausting. And so to see that word enough on the front of her book, for me, that kind of answered a whole bunch of questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to talk about how fascism, which is a very explicit word, and some journalists don't want to use it because they don't think it's appropriate, and referring to Trump as a fascist is obviously quite controversial. For those of us who have done it and have come out the other side, we're sticking with it because we understand the stakes, especially those of us who've come from European nations where we've seen, the threat of fascism firsthand. But I want to talk about how it's been diluted and authoritarianism has been diluted to the point that people now, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, have been brainwashed to think that actually it's a better system than democracy. And let's use democracy as the defining word here, because, I've said a few times in this show now that it's starting to be a word that is exclusive to Democrats.
Yeah.
And so how do we get to a point where Republicans don't care for democracy and are openly saying that is not our system? We're a constitutional republic. We do not need democracy. And they are trying to ignore the nuance of democracy and just focus on brainwashing their supporters into thinking that democracy is not an American thing. It is for other countries, and that's not how we do it here.
Yeah. So Glenn Beck wrote a book about this, and it came out in maybe 2005 or something like that. And it's been a regular talking point on the right throughout the new millennium. And I think that it might have something to do with what happened in Bush v. Gore, right, in 2000, where the popular vote went for Al Gore, but George Bush became president from some shenanigans. The Supreme Court ruled in Bush v. Gore. Probably haven't had a reason to read that opinion, but you can go find it on the internet. And it's like in the second paragraph. And it says very explicitly that the average citizen does not have the right to select the president of the United States. That right belongs to the states. If the states choose to share their right with the people, then it's subject to the Equal Protection Clause and, the other parts of the Constitution. That's accurate, but it's not something that we embrace when we think about our nation as, the beacon on the hill. When we think about our nation as the protector of democratic values around the world, which is how we have thought about our nation throughout the 20th century. And so, presidents will always use American exceptionalism to try to hold the nation accountable to its best version of itself, right? To our values. And so it's always been a message of, we are this chosen nation that is a democracy. We are chosen to spread our democracy and our democratic values. So therefore we should go to war. Therefore we should protect this other nation. Therefore we should, do something else, whatever it is. And what we have seen since 2000 is a gradual sort of moving away from that towards this version of the government as, almost self-centered. So the way that Donald Trump used American exceptionalism was antithetical to the way any previous president had done it. For him, it was America winning, full stop, right? So the way you said before, there are winners and there are losers. Donald Trump wants to make America great again by making us the winner. And so that means we are not a part of a network or, a community of nations around the world. We don't have a special purpose, which is to promote and protect democracy. But instead, it means we should be winning. We shouldn't make any sacrifices. We shouldn't do anything to help anyone else unless it, directly gives us some kind of financial benefit. That is the opposite of the way that we have thought about American exceptionalism. It folds in this whole difference between whether we're a democracy or not. Right? You could write a very interesting book on this, how this has happened in this country.
Well, you should write it because you have form. You have form. I would agree. To me, I think, democracy means different things to different people in the same way that fascism means different things to different people. You can't really define any of these things without context and without nuance, right? So, but in this context, the things that keep us safe, which I think you're describing, are the very things that Donald Trump is seeking to remove, the institutions that protect us. In fact, there was an article in Rolling Stone that I want to quote, and it said, Donald Trump's plans to give himself sweeping powers on day one of a new administration include sending vast numbers of U.S. troops, potentially hundreds of thousands, to close the southern border and to help build a new network of immigrant detention camps. Trump and some of his lieutenants have repeatedly stated that any second administration must treat migrant crossings as a war on American soil. And I think Mark Esper has really kind of exposed an awful lot of this in his book. I don't know why these people wait till the book comes out. It's like, come on, you were right there in the room where it happened. Just go for it. I blame Mike Pence for a lot of that. Anyway, I digress. That stuff of sending troops to the southern border will play very well with Donald Trump's base and the people that support him, and even some traditional conservatives. The idea that it is a war and that migration is bad and that, Trump is the solution to this. That is what worries me the most, is that the simplistic language and the kind of fascist undertones of all of this stuff is very attractive to a large number of Americans. Potentially almost half the voters.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about the framing of the issue. And so it's another thing that I've paid attention to that I find fascinating, which is the way that the right-wing media ecosystem frames what's happening at the border as an invasion, always as an invasion. Yeah. Whereas the mainstream media will call it a crisis. They'll call it a humanitarian crisis, right? That way of framing the issue changes entirely what you think are the reasonable policy solutions to the problem. Yeah. Right? So if it's an invasion, then that means that we need troops, we need camps, we need weapons, right? If it's a humanitarian crisis, then we need the Red Cross. Yeah, we NGOs. Need, bottles of water. We need, the
tents and blankets.
Yeah. we need caring, actions. Yeah. And so it's really interesting to look at framing because it activates how you think about the problem itself or the issue. And it changes it completely, right? Is it a situation where we should provide care? Or is it a situation where we should bring arms and prepare to defend? And those are incompatible. They're absolutely incompatible. And so if you're someone who's saying, we should provide care to the people at the border, to someone who understands the issue through the war frame, they're going to think you're insane, right? Not only are you soft on, crime or whatever. I don't know. But you're you're committing treason. You're betraying the country. We're being invaded and attacked. This is war. And you're talking about providing care, right? Like it's absolutely incompatible. And so you can't solve the problem when you have these competing frames. There's an organization called More in Common. You probably have heard of them. Mm-hmm. They've asked people on the left and on the right, what do you think about the border? What should we do? And what they found is that, and this is very interesting to me, is that Republicans and Democrats have almost the same view of what the solutions are.
Yeah.
But they think that the opposition has completely opposite views of what the solutions are. And so we have this really distorted view of what the other side thinks is reality compared to what they actually think is reality. We have more in common than we think.
It's the same with inflation.
Yeah.
Right? Both parties have the same view of inflation, and yet it's weaponized. They also fail to mention that inflation was up around the world in every country, and every country is struggling to bring it down, and some have been more successful than others after the pandemic. And they also fail to mention that immigration is a problem in every country. I mean, certainly where I'm from, they've got this most terrible fascistic policy at the moment of sending migrants to Rwanda and to stop the small boats that are coming across the English Channel. I mean, it is so offensive. But again, 14 years of a conservative government in the UK that has done this. And so I do think that just going back to American exceptionalism and this kind of isolationist attitude about the country, it's only if you start to introduce the policies of other nations and think about how other countries have done it, successfully or otherwise, do you realize that this is not a uniquely American problem, and that issues of migration and inflation, is the same the world over.
That's right. And there are issues that are only going to become more pronounced, right? With climate catastrophe, you have people moving from place to place to try to find somewhere safe to live, somewhere hospitable, with wars emerging and escalating all over, same. And what we've seen, I've heard some really, I'm not an expert on immigration, issues as much as I am about the language. But I've heard some really interesting interviews with people who work for the UN and these other organizations. And what they've said is that around the world, the people who are supposed to be in charge of, funding immigration, so in terms of evaluating people's credentials and, sort of making the process work, that those organizations and institutions in various nations have all been defunded, basically.
Yeah.
And so it creates this extra backlog of chaos. And
the rise of the authoritarian as well, because
it provides
there are more
context.
countries than ever with authoritarian leadership, and where the voters are choosing the far right extremist and fascist leader because they claim to be the answer to all of their problems.
Right. So cause chaos and instability, take advantage of it, and then
claim to be the solution.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Let's talk more about that in just a moment. We have to take another quick pause for our sponsor, and then we'll be back with more from Jennifer Mercieca. Are you having trouble sleeping or staying asleep? Is poor sleep negatively impacting your life? Have you tried other sleep supplements with no success? Sleep is the foundation of our mental and physical health. When you're sleeping well, you can perform at your best, mentally and physically. Proper sleep can increase focus, boost energy, and improve your mood. Introducing Beam's Dream Powder, the science-backed healthy hot cocoa for sleep. If you know me, you'll know that Dream has been a game changer for my sleep. And today, you get a special discount on Beam's Dream Powder, their science-backed healthy hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar. Better sleep has never tasted better. Now available in delicious flavors like chocolate peanut butter, cinnamon cocoa, and sea salt caramel. With only 15 calories and no grams of sugar, better sleep has never tasted better. Other sleep aids can cause next-day grogginess, but Dream contains a powerful, all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, melatonin, and nano-CBD to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. The numbers don't lie. In a clinical study, 93% of participants reported that Dream helped them get a better sleep. Find out why Forbes and the New York Times are all talking about Beam and why it's trusted by the world's top athletes and business professionals. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND for up to 40% off. Welcome back to the Weekend Show. The rise of the far-right leader, invariably men, but there are others like Marine Le Pen in France, for example, who actually lost recently, but even so, the support for these characters is increasing. Viktor Orban in Hungary, not Turkey, as Donald Trump might tell you, where President Erdogan is himself a far-right character. And these people, I mean, Orban especially, he is one of the individuals that Donald Trump and his surrogates cite often as someone who is successful at managing their country. And Trump, as we mentioned earlier, cites Xi Jinping in China. And we haven't mentioned Putin yet, but, you know, Putin has just announced that he's going to be staying on and there's going to be another sham vote and he'll do 6 more years and, you know, everything else. Why is it that the world at this moment in time is leaning towards these right-wing fascist leaders and how, you know, we were saying at the very beginning of this conversation, you know, how did it ever happen in America? Well, this is an international trend.
Yeah, it's partially because of chaos and instability, some of which has been caused by the proliferation of participatory media, right? So the ability of everyone to say what's on their mind has destabilized the established version of reality, has destabilized the truth, you know, as we were told, that, you know, they've lost control. And so when the managers of society lose control of communication, they try to reassert control in other ways. This is how it's always been. You know, it's a fascinating thing to see. It's also incredibly dangerous, and it's happened repeatedly. What you find is that people who have authoritarian motivations, whether they have authoritarian personalities or not, they have a will to power. They will take advantage of the situation. They will take advantage of chaos, of climate catastrophe, of immigration and migration that we were talking about before, changes in the economy, right? The entirety of all of those changes that we have seen over the last 20, 25 years since the rise of the internet, you know, those are incredibly destabilizing, stress-making things. We have changed completely, you know, the way we move, the way we, whether we move, you know, how we communicate, via computers and whatnot. And, people who are determined to take advantage of situations like that, people like Steve Bannon, people like the political consultants who advised Viktor Orban, and also Netanyahu. You know, those people are very comfortable in seizing a vulnerability, a lacuna, right? A gap in normalcy, and taking advantage of it. And so they've been very determined, and they've been very successful. It's pretty easy to activate authoritarian tendencies in people, like we discussed earlier. Yeah. You know, there's essentially just a recipe for it, and it's not hard to figure out what it is.
But it's been a long, you know, this didn't just happen since Donald Trump seized power in 2016. I mean, this has been going on for decades. And you mentioned the brainwashing through right-wing media, which has been dripping away. And for those of us who don't really listen to that stuff, and I think this is part of the problem with Democrats, is they also isolate themselves into a space that is, that they are missing what is going on the other side. And I try and expose myself to everything. And the rhetoric is that Democrats are evil, that like Democrats are from hell, that Democrats want to come and control you, that Democrats want to take away your guns and indoctrinate your children. None of that is true. But if you are in that space, it can all seem very, very likely. And what is so sad about this whole conversation, certainly from my perspective as an outsider, is that the whole mess of American politics is just an issue of miscommunication, and that actually people are really very similar, and that there isn't the polarization in reality, only in fantasy, and that we are ultimately all the same. As humans, we all want the same things. And so the whole thing is a sham.
Yes.
All of it.
Yes.
And it's going to kill us. I mean, it's going to be our downfall. A sham disagreement is going to crash the American dream.
Yes. So I call it the manufacture of dissent, after what Chomsky wrote about the manufacture of consent. Yeah. But that's absolutely where we are in this country. Reality is what we see on television. We don't have direct firsthand experience with most things, with most political news and information. We have to trust some media source to tell us the truth about what's going on. And that is a vulnerability, right? It allows for the media to shape what we think is true and how we understand the world. They provide us with these frames that absolutely tell us, it's either an invasion or it's a humanitarian crisis. And that changes how we think about it, not just whether we think about it, but how we think about it. And it makes it so that it's so difficult to have a conversation with someone who has in a different frame from you that you feel like they're crazy. Right? You feel like they don't make any sense. You feel like they're betraying us, yes, our values, whatever they are, depending on which side you're on. And so the whole goal of fascism is, you're absolutely right. It's a long con. It's a con man's game. Fascists are con men, and they're usually men. The fascist con, first of all, is to tell you that politics is war and the enemy cheats. Right? So politics is not war. Full stop. War is war. You cheapen war by saying that politics, making a decision about how to vote, is actually war. That's not war. Politics is about negotiating power. It's about resolving differences, and it's about solving problems. It's not war. They're very different things. And your political opposition is not your enemy. They are someone who has good reasons for thinking differently about what is the best policy for solving the problem.
Yeah. And they help with accountability. That is the fundamentals of democracy, is that you need healthy opposition to maintain a moral compass in politics.
Absolutely. And I live in a red state. I teach at a school that is proud of being conservative. I talk every day with people who think differently than I do. And I can tell you, they're good people and they mean well.
Yeah.
They're very much shaped by the information that they receive. I have members of my family who are conservative and that expose themselves to conservative news and information. I can tell you, it's difficult to have conversations with those folks. It is.
Isn't it interesting, though, how Republicans have been brainwashed to actually hate Democrats, and yet Democrats would never hate Republicans. They just maybe feel sorry for the fact that they're misinformed.
Yeah, it is interesting. So going back to the research on authoritarian personalities, one of the things that might help to answer that question is they did some research on authoritarians and high religiosity, right? So people who are very committed to their religion, whatever it is. And what they found was that if they asked them, should the United States be established as, for example, a Christian nation? People who were highly religious and high on right-wing authoritarianism would say, absolutely, if they're Christian, right? The United States should be a Christian nation. But if you ask them, this nation is not Christian, should they be allowed to establish their religion as a national religion? They were like, no, I don't like that, right? Because what about those people who aren't that religion? So very much like want their values to be the established norm and think that those are correct. If you asked atheists, should you abolish religion in the United States? The atheists would say, can you guess?
Well, as an atheist, I would say, no, of course.
That's exactly right.
Right.
That's what the atheists say, no.
Yeah, of course. Religion, a belief system is necessary for some people. For atheists like myself, it's just not necessary. It's not that I hate Christians or that I don't believe in this or that. Yes. I don't even think about it. That's do correct. You. Just don't make me do you.
That is absolutely correct. And so people who are authoritarian, and you can take the authoritarianism quiz if you want, Google it, Altmaier, I'll send you the link.
Yeah.
But this is exactly right, is that people who are atheists or / Democrats, right, in the small d democracy version, they're like, you do you. We're for like equality and liberty. And if that's what you want to believe, great. Should we abolish it? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Whereas people who are authoritarian do not think that way. They want to defend group norms and they want to establish those norms in that hierarchy. They want rules that are consistent with their values, and they think that all others should be eliminated. And that's the difference.
And that's why Donald Trump packing the Supreme Court with far-right Christian nationalists. I mean, there was a report out on Friday that showed that Justice Neil Gorsuch took just 10 minutes to approve the Dobbs abortion opinion. 10 minutes. Probably not even that. He made up his mind before he even signed it off. And isn't this the problem? That you cannot... I mean, I personally, and I've said this a few times and people don't really like it, but I personally think Donald Trump will slip through the fingers of justice because he has packed the courts, not just the Supreme Court, but, even the Florida court that he's, being heard in with loyalists. And those three Supreme Court justices in Amy Coney Barrett, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh, they owe him a debt of loyalty. And so
That's
wants
the rule
his
by law
cases,
strategy.
Yeah, he wants his cases to go to the Supreme Court, even though Jack Smith has called his bluff recently and said, fine, let's have them hear it. My fear is that, as you described, that the Christian nationalism, that kind of far-right tribalism, will overpower anything that we would, we give justices credit, don't we? We think that they'll do the right thing. Those days are over.
Maybe. It's one of the inherent vulnerabilities of democracy, right? Which is to say that democracy requires free speech. Otherwise, you don't have democracy. Democracy requires liberalism. Otherwise, you don't have democracy, right? And so the paradox has always been that you should allow for, as much diversity of opinion or thinking or whatever, tolerate all views and perspectives, except for those that are intolerant, right? So we're at a point where the intolerant have taken control and the tolerant have tolerated the intolerant, because that's what we do, right? That's democracy.
Yeah.
But that's a vulnerability, and it's that paradox that we have to face down in 2024. How do we live in a society where the intolerant have the ability to game the system, to pervert the rule of law, and to turn it into a rule by law, authoritarian government, and the rest of us sort of sit idly by and say, well, but that's what they want, right? That's what the people want. And so that's where we're at, is that paradox.
And so there is a solution to all of this because, sometimes when we have these conversations, it can feel like the end of the world is nigh. And weirdly, the end of the world is nigh because there's a climate crisis and no one is talking about that. I mean, COP28 that's just finished in was it Dubai or Abu Dhabi? The guy who got given the presidency role for this time around is an oil baron, right? Yeah. I mean, he changed the language so that they talked about transitioning away from fossil fuel as opposed to abolishing fossil fuel. It's so dangerous. And Republicans who think that the southern border is a war are going to have a whole new fight on their hands when we have climate migration in 10 or 20 years' time, where people are moving en masse because it's simply too hot to live where they live.
Yeah. So Canadians are going to have a rough time.
Canadians, true.
Everyone's going to go to Canada.
Right. And America without the guns, apparently.
Yeah.
But so that problem is one that we're not predicting. We know it's happening. Yeah. Conversations are not happening in the US about that. Europe is talking about it and doing something about it, but the US has got too many short-term problems, i.e. the rise of fascism, to worry about climate change. And I can understand that, despite it being the second biggest polluter on the planet. So what we're dealing with now in the short term is an opportunity to change all of this and actually right all the wrongs by voting. And, I often say I'm not a Democrat, but I am vehemently pro-democracy. If you care for democracy, if there was a landslide win for the Democrats under Joe Biden or whoever is the caretaker, because leadership is irrelevant. It is, you're voting for your right to vote effectively. If Biden wins in November, then, and let's say he wins all three branches of government, all of these issues that we've been so worried about will actually be handled appropriately.
I think that's right. I am also an independent, or at least I think of myself as an independent, and I'm a democracy voter, full stop. I love democracy so much. And yeah, we're, and this goes back to the point that I made a while back, which is we are under fascism watch. The ingredients are right for fascism, but do not be fatalistic about it. It is not a fascism warning, right? The fascism is not, imminent, impending. But if we don't vote, and if we don't take the threat seriously, we really will be in the situation of it being fascism warning. It's right there. We're right there.
So it's a choice. It's democracy with Joe Biden versus dictatorship with Donald Trump. And
that is the situation as I understand it.
And the only way for us to make a dent in the numbers is for everybody to vote, because voter apathy is still a thing. People need to know that this election is more important than any previous one for this very reason, that the democracy is at stake. And so, I mean, how do they get everybody out? I mean, how do they, in the media, just, with your area of expertise, finally, what does the media have? It should be like a PSA, right? Like literally a public service announcement to say, you want to carry on voting and loving who you love and having access to your rights. You haven't got a choice. You have to vote Democrat.
Yeah. So fear appeals work. We know that. And typically the conservative party in America, the Republican Party, is more likely to use fear appeals. What I've seen from the research is that with the Democratic Party today and the way that coalition is built, that they are very receptive to freedom arguments. And so, framing it as authoritarianism versus democracy, which is true, could activate people's, fear appeal response, their threat response. But it's probably better to also include freedom arguments. So, like you said, if you want to keep loving who you love, if you don't want your marriage to be taken away, if you want your kid to be able to go to school in a safe place where they can read books, if you want the rule of law and justice, right? If you want these things, if you want the freedom to end your pregnancy if you don't want to be pregnant, those are all messages that resonate with Democratic voters because all of those things are on the line. And so it's really important to connect the threat to the freedoms, I think, in the messaging.
Okay. We have to finish, but
okay.
what a joy to have this conversation. And I'm pleased that we were able to kind of isolate areas that I've really struggled to articulate previously. And I'm very grateful to you for that. Jennifer Mercieca, thanks for joining the Weekend Show.
Thank you. I always enjoy chatting with you.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. Download my daily 5-Minute News podcast wherever you get yours. And join us next week with more factual news stories to discuss on the 5-Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.